And joining me now is Rev Dr William Barber. He is the co-chairman of the Poor People's Campaign, the president and senior lecturer for Repairers of the Breach, and architect of Moral Mondays. Rev Barber and his team have been putting the pressure on Senator Joe Manchin, and starting today, are running this ad in newspapers across the country, asking Senator Joe Manchin, which side are you on? Rev Dr Barber, I wanted to ask you, you have spent time in West Virginia. You have led gatherings, marches in West Virginia. Given that the senator from that state remains right now the principal obstacle to this giant package of social help, was it your impression from traveling in West Virginia that government assistance would be damaging to the people of West Virginia, as Senator Manchin clearly seems to worry?
Well, no, it actually would be helpful. 700,000 people in West Virginia are poor and low wealth. 350,000 people make less than a living wage. You know, one of the things I'm concerned about, though, as your guest just mentioned, we keep saying West Virginia is a red state. It really is not. It's an unorganized state. It's a state where poor and low wealth people have not been inspired. And poor and low wealth people who have not voted hold the key to changing who sits in the Senate and sits in the governor's race. And so Joe Manchin is really against his people. The majority of the people in West Virginia don't agree with what he's doing. And we've got to learn that for somebody like him, you have to touch him in his state. When we first marched on him with over 800 people to his doorstep, with people that look like him, black and white, people from the hood to the holler, that's the night. The next day he came out with his compromise on voting rights. You have to go where he is. You have to expose how what he's doing is hurting minors and hurting women and hurting children and hurting the disabled right in his own state. And that's what we intend to continue to do.
Reverend, you are one of those people who are deft at working the outside game and the inside game. While you run these ads and lead these protests, have you had conversations with Senator Manchin, and do you understand his calculus from the inside?
Well, we were the first group that met with him, but we didn't go in by ourselves. We went in with 12 people from West Virginia, poor and low wealth people. And at that time, that's when he came out and said, oh, no, I want a living wage. I just want to start at $11. A few weeks ago, when we had a caravan of over 150 cars of people from West Virginia, and they compared him to the bosses of the 1920s, he made a big effort to go to the AP and say, no, I want a living wage. No, I'm still working on voting rights. He can be moved, but he has to be moved from inside the state. He has to be moved by people that look like him. You know, he's a calculating fellow, but he's not unmovable. And what we have to do is stand tall. And some of what has to happen is the House now is going to have to hold the line. The 160-plus members of the Black Caucus and the Progressive Caucus are going to have to unify and say, you aren't going to get what you want, Mr. Manchin, unless you move on these other things. And then we can't let him win certain things. For instance, right now in this voting rights bill that they have put out, do you know inside that bill, for the first time in the history of this country, it codifies a lie. It says that voter ID is necessary for voter integrity, voter confidence, and access. That has to come out. That can't stay in there. There's a lot of good things in that bill, but that's the Trump lie, the insurrection lie, the extremist lie, and it's got to be moved. You have to push Manchin hard. You have to move in his state. That's why we're not only running these ads and starting a call-in, but we're preparing for sit-ins and other forms of nonviolent civil disobedience in his state, in his own offices. We don't intend to turn back. We learned in Moral Monday, you have to do it from the bottom up, and you have to do it in the states. That's what we did in North Carolina. That's what we're going to have to do in West Virginia.
Reverend, I think because this legislation is so sweeping and so much of the Biden program has been pushed into this one thing, a lot of people consumed by a pandemic and by their own lives don't really necessarily know what is in it for them yet. So I want you, having spent time in the state of West Virginia, if you were to imagine a kind of median constituent of Senator Joe Manchin, a median person in the state of West Virginia, not unlike people in your state and elsewhere in this country. Can you rattle off the list of the things that would change in that person's life from the cradle to the grave because of this proposed legislation?
Yeah, well, your health care would change. The impact of climate on poor communities would change. Money being invested into the community to change that would create jobs. Those things would change. It would have an impact on every economic aspect of your life. And that's one of the things that Democrats have got to do. So let's stop arguing the dollars. because a country that spent $21 trillion in war since 9/11 cannot say it doesn't have the money. And 84% of the money that we spent for COVID relief went to businesses and corporations. We treat corporations like people and people like things. What we need to do, and they need to have people who will be impacted, black people, white people, brown people, natives, Asian. Let them stand with legislators and tell their stories and then present what this bill does. Don't just put the number out there, $3 trillion over 10 years, but talk about what it does for health care, what it does for clean water, what it does for jobs, what it does for infrastructure, what it does to help relieve debt. And so make this a moral issue. We have actually said to the president, we are petitioning him, and we've said to him, he needs to sit with the religious leaders of this country, diverse, not just black. He needs to sit with poor and low wealth people, some of our economists and voting rights experts, and come together with impacted people and then say we have to have a moral reset. In other words, there are three infrastructures we got to protect. The infrastructure of our democracy, which is voting rights. The infrastructure of our daily lives, which is health care and living wages and clean water, and then the infrastructure of our roads, bridges, and those things, technology. And you cannot do one without the other. So we're praying with the president. Sit down with this group, then go to West Virginia. That's your state. You're the president. Go to Arizona, go to Texas, and then go to the well of the Congress and make the case, not starting with the money, but starting with the mandates and who will be helped and who will be lifted up from the bottom up. And that way we can change this from just being about dollars to a moral issue and a values issue. And if we do that, the public will rally behind this. And I believe we can change even a mansion.
Well, after 20 years, Reverend, of claims to be spreading democracy and nation building abroad, what you seem to be advocating is spreading democracy and nation building here in the United States. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. William Barber, for joining us.